So welcome, glad to have you joining us. Today we are lucky to have with us Christopher Gruits, who happens to be the Executive and Artistic Director of the Annenberg Center at the University of Pennsylvania. For those of you who have never been to the Annenberg Center, it is a spectacular venue, and I'm so impressed by the programming that they have here. And the guy who's behind all the artistic direction is with us today. So he's joining us together. I'm Dave Reibstein, a member of the marketing faculty, and I am joined by my colleague, Raghu Iyengar, who is the director of the Wharton Customer Analytics and also a professor here of the marketing department. But let's get started, Christopher. Welcome, glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
My first question, just to get us started, is give us a little bit of your background and how long you've been in your current position.
Sure. Well, I've been at the Annenberg Center for about 4.5 years here in Philadelphia. Prior to that, I was vice president and executive producer for presentations at Interlochen Center for the Arts, which is a major arts education and really national level art center in northern Michigan. And earlier in my career, I was at Carnegie Hall twice. I was Carnegie Hall's first head of digital strategy, and I also worked in the programming and production units of the hall. I did an MBA at the University of Edinburgh Business School in the UK, and my undergrad is in humanities with a focus on arts management, but really, started as a voice major, as a music major in my undergrad, and was lucky enough to be at Michigan State University in the 90s when they had introduced multidisciplinary program that really covered arts management as a core area. So it was really a mix of undergraduate business curriculum with a focus on a particular art forms. It could have been visual arts or performance, happened to be performance in my case.
Wow, that's an impressive background. I will tell you, by the way, my son is in theater art. And so
right.
Certainly appreciate that. He's up at Cornell right now. But your background is very, very impressive. What I have observed from the Philadelphia Orchestra to Carnegie Hall to various different, Broadway and other performing venues is this pandemic has had major impact on basically how you operate. And so could you get us started by telling us how this whole COVID has affected the Annenberg Center?
Absolutely. So I think it's fair to say, it's not dramatic to say that this is probably the most significant challenge the arts and culture industry has faced, certainly within the last 100 years. I think you could draw comparisons, obviously, to the Spanish flu when the industry was in a very different state. But this is certainly generationally the biggest, challenge that we've had as an industry. Overnight, really, we were faced with the total, just pausing of the entire global industry of touring, of performances, of people coming together for live performances. And it happened so quickly. So I think what's, first of all, a great testament to the industry is that we were able to adapt so quickly. And many places continue on a weekly, monthly basis to try to pivot, to try to adapt to the circumstances. But for so many industries, it happened really overnight. So I think that was the first primary challenge. I think the main issue that we have, of course, is that arts and culture, and particularly performing arts, is really about bringing people together in a shared experience. And that shared experience is very unique. It's really centered on a live experience. And so because we can't really do that or can't do it safely or at the level of safety that we would like thus far, it means that we've seen really a real stopping of our revenue and our income. And I think that is particularly challenged to deal with. You can do a lot to curtail expenses and to mitigate these big fiscal impacts, but if you don't have your kind of tried and true revenue coming in and earnings coming in, that makes it very challenging for these institutions. So I think, a couple of things, the fact that it was so fast, the fact that our core revenue streams were hit very significantly, very quickly, have made it a particularly challenging experience. And then you'll see some variability depending on the organization. So if it's an orchestra, they have the added challenge of bringing together multiple people in a closed space to produce a performance. Same for dance ensembles or theater companies. So there's the product side of things, but then there's, of course, also the audience side and customer side of things where that audience can't gather in the same way. So that makes it incredibly challenging to try to adapt and adjust for really kind of a short-term scenario and then also a medium-term and longer-term scenario planning situation. And I think if I can be honest, one of the biggest challenges has been just the endless amount of scenario planning that we have to undertake. And this really, constant updating and adapting to the timeline. And our timelines are very much in line with the uptake of vaccinations. So really, as vaccinations are introduced, and really, you see those becoming much more widespread in communities, that's when we really can look to a return to in-person events and attendance. We can do some in-person events and attendance now because of the latest updates from the city of Philadelphia, for example, but they're very small. So they make it very challenging to try to bring audience back in. I think right now it's about 10% of your normal capacity, which really makes it almost impossible to do.
No, Chris, I think that certainly, as you rightly pointed out, that particular industry as well, clearly going through a lot of turbulence. On your end, I think, I'm a loyal follower of the Annenberg Center. I receive your emails
Thank
as
you.
well. So certainly it's been, as they mentioned, it's been an amazing place for us to kind of come and, see some of the best performances.
Sure.
But more recently, the emails I've been getting, as you pointed out, were about digital performances.
Right.
And so how have you made that transition? Did you and the group kind of think about who might be artists that might perhaps be better suited for digital? How did you go about making that process?
Sure. So, I mentioned how quickly this all occurred. We were really tasked with adapting overnight, like so many businesses. And, in the case of capturing performance for digital streaming, this was something that we had planned over the longer term. It was something certainly the center was going to think about over the next few years. So I think in some ways, the pandemic has forced this disruption has forced us to adapt to this new medium for delivery. Of course, we were doing a lot of marketing campaigns, promotions, and communications online anyway, but we weren't really capturing our core product for digital delivery. And we also had no mechanism in place for people to consume that product online. So we had to pivot very quickly. We did a really thorough survey of what options were available to a medium-sized performing arts institution. We weren't at the scale where we could adapt a huge amount of infrastructure and hugely expensive streaming platforms, but we also could do a little bit more than just, a free platform such as YouTube. So we did a big analysis of this. We talked to a lot of different vendors and really tried to focus on vendors who had experience with not-for-profit institutions, that understood how not-for-profit institutions are really mission-driven and trying to really capture programs for a loyal audience base. So I think for us, it was really about identifying the infrastructure first and foremost. What type of camera setup would we need, and then how would we deliver those performances? But then when we think about the core product and how artists create performances, we ask you a lot when you come to a performing arts presentation, right? We ask you to come into the theater, to turn off your phone, to sit in the dark for 2 hours, really not to engage with the outside world. It's a big commitment, especially today when everything's so rapid and digitally based. So we had to really think differently about the types of performance we would present. It really probably wasn't going to work if we were going to present a 2-hour-long modern dance experience or a 2-hour-long jazz show of 2 sets, for example. So initially we optimized these to be focused really in duration to about an hour. We talked with a lot of artists that we had relationships with to say, we have this opportunity. We want to, stream live real-time performances from our theater without an audience. And we've really become, subsequently one of the few places in the Philly metro area that are doing that. Really, there's only 2 or 3. But we really wanted to focus on digital first programming. And what I mean by digital first is attention spans are much shorter. So we knew people probably wouldn't stay on a site or a stream for 2 hours. We wanted to get these within that hour durational time frame. But also we really wanted to ask artists to come up with programs and work, in some cases new work, that was really optimized for digital. And one component that we felt was very important was to integrate a live chat function into these streams. We wanted our core audience of subscribers and donors to really feel like they were connecting with fellow ticket holders. I mentioned this kind of shared experience in terms of coming together for live performances, and so much about live performances around community. It's about community coming together to share an experience, to catch up in the lobby. We have subscribers who have been coming to the theater for 30 years. They've had their same seats. They have friends who sit around them. They have favorite companies that they follow. And so that community aspect is really one thing that I think we've all been missing in so many ways, right? We're always on Zoom, we're always doing these video calls. But I think getting that technology in place where people who are viewing a live stream could connect with other ticket buyers was really important. So we focus these on hour-long presentations, quite often on new work that an artist was coming up with. And we integrated a chat function during the stream for audience members. And then we also integrated the end of the production, really around 15 minutes or so, of a Q&A with me hosting with the artist. So that's really a way for us to facilitate questions directly from the audience. So the audience can ask artists questions directly in a way that sometimes in live performance, they wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity. Of course, in live performances, we do Q&As, post-concert talkbacks, that type of thing. So it's essentially that format, but we wanted to replicate that digitally for these types of programs.
It's fascinating to hear all the things that you've had to adapt. And as you say, it came about so suddenly. And it was like, we need to do it now. You raised so many things I want to ask questions about. You had programming that had already been set up for the year. Did you keep that programming, or did you have to wipe the slate clean? And that's one of the questions. And the second one is, you said something about people coming and performing still on stage at the theater in front of an empty audience. And and that dynamic, I know for Raghu and I, we are both teaching to empty classrooms.
Sure.
That's all virtual. So I'm curious about both of those things. Existing programming versus totally new, and then performing in front of a empty theater.
Absolutely. So to answer your first question, I think the biggest challenge was the touring calendar and the touring schedules. I always say the performing arts business is fairly old-fashioned in a lot of ways. You're really planning out large, physical tours of people coming to a city very far in advance, let's say 2 to 3 years in advance in many cases. And sometimes that window can be shorter depending on the type of genre or artist. But typically, if we think about, the Annenberg's bread and butter in many ways is a dance series. So bringing in major world-class dance ensembles. And those are typically planned, a year and a half to 3 years in advance. So all of that season, which we had completed, for the following year, we were about to launch. We were finalizing our brochure. We were getting ready to launch in that April. This all, stopped in March. So we had an entire season plan that we would, be experiencing right now, which really had to be put on pause. So most of those performances were rescheduled into the following season and then rescheduled again because we're obviously still in this situation. Some of those performances were canceled because they were international artists who couldn't come to Philadelphia and come to the US because of the border restrictions. And then others were what I would say just kind of paused. We, have maintained our commitment to the artist or the ensemble, but we're holding off for now and trying to really think about the appropriate season when we could bring them back. But a lot of that work happens on the phone. It's happens through relationships that you have with agents, managers, and artists. And they're very personal relationships. You can call people, get answers very quickly. And I have to say that the managers and the agents in our industry who are working with these artists did a phenomenal job of trying to adapt and really, make sure that their artists and their ensembles had some type of touring schedule to come back to. So that was very challenging. And I would say it's very much still in process, Dave. It's really something that I was just working on this morning for next season. So it's a kind of ever evolving process. And one great way to illustrate that is we're thinking about, what I mentioned earlier, that vaccine uptake. As soon as enough people have the vaccination, they'll feel comfortable coming back to theaters. That's very much our hope. But we have to plan those events very far in advance. And so right now there's a lot of projecting, a lot of modeling in terms of our revenue models about when and if we start performances, what's the appropriate month to do that? What type of scale should we be going for, and what type of program? So that's kind of an ever evolving process. I think your second question was about adapting to digital delivery without an audience, and maybe some of the factors involved in that. And as you both probably know, teaching into the void or into the vacuum, it's very challenging. You're not getting that, response from the students or from your audience. And so much about public speaking or performance or that type of communication is based on feedback. So I have to say that, my first curtain speech to the camera, in an almost empty theater was very odd. Usually the audience is, there and they're responding to what I say, and we're having a nice exchange. But I think more importantly for the artists who are performing, it really is a very different environment for them. Artists really respond to an audience. They shape their program based on audience feedback. They're expert communicators. Their job is really to communicate vulnerability and to communicate whatever they're trying to say in terms of the narrative or the broader metaphor. So I think that's been incredibly hard for artists, in that they really only have the crew and me to respond to. We may be sitting in the back of the hall, but we've tried to do this. We're really committed to the live experience. And I think for us, we made a decision early on that we didn't want to create art house films, for example. We felt that even though a lot of our peers are doing that, and we applaud them for that work, that wasn't something we were interested in. We didn't want to create a catalog of films. We felt that type of medium was really well covered. What we're very good at is producing live events and showcasing live performances. So we wanted to maintain that commitment to live performance, and we figured out a way to do that safely during the pandemic through kind of a socially distanced production approach, which was complicated to figure out initially, but now we really have it down to a science. So there's very rigorous testing to come into the building. It's all based on the university's approach, the one pass approach to coming onto campus. And if artists are coming from out of Philadelphia, they have to provide proof of a negative COVID test to get in and do the production. So it's an added layer, of course, to the production, but it means that everybody's safe and that we can realize these productions in real time, which I think is a big advantage.
Wow, Chris, I applaud you and the team for all of this thinking and, kind of real time, kind of pivoting to this model. I think Dave's questions are mostly around the artist side of things. I would love to hear your thoughts on the audience side of things. A lot of the audience, like myself and Dave, who've come to the Annenberg Center quite often, you're used to one kind of experience. And obviously through the pandemic, while obviously a lot of the audience would probably be very encouraged to see the Annenberg Center still putting on a digital show, how was their reception? Were they excited about it? Did they have to do the extra mile, so to speak, to kind of say, well, we're still getting it, but it's not all the way there? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Well, I think when you pivot to digital, you have a lot more options. For example, that question of who is our audience becomes a very different question, of course. So when you're online, your audience really could be worldwide. All of a sudden you have access to a global audience in a way that you didn't before. But at the same time, you really have to ensure that your core audience, really that tribe, I would refer to them as our tribe of subscribers and donors and loyal ticket buyers, are really feeling like they're well served and that they're getting something they can react to. So we decided pretty early on that we weren't going to capture performances and put them up for free, that we really wanted to compensate artists for their work, and that we were going to take a kind of a hyper-local approach to our digital delivery. When I say hyper-local, I mean we really wanted to focus on our core constituents, really making sure that people within the Philadelphia metro area who are our core ticket buyers had a program that they could subscribe to or react to. And so that means that overall, some of our peers who have decided to capture content for free distribution might be getting really massive audiences to scale online, but they're not necessarily monetizing that content, and they're serving a very different audience, which I think also has its advantages. So I think in our case, what we found is that there was definitely uptake of our subscriptions. People at first had a lot of questions about the mode of delivery, how they were going to consume the performance, what was the best piece of technology to do that. And so I think that will continue to evolve. You know, in the future, we'll have kind of a platform of content that's really branded that people can access via an app. So that will be coming in the future. But to get things started, we wanted to really deliver these as kind of real-time one-off events. And I think that audience has responded very positively, but of course, it's a very small percentage of what our typical revenue would be. And I think that that is very consistent with our peers across the country. People are really seeing, on the whole, very small percentages of their typical revenue, just because there's not the same, you know, kind of natural resubscribing, for example. If you think about subscription models, of course, it's so much of it is ease of use, right? And so renewing that membership or renewing that subscription, you kind of set and forget. And I think with a performance subscription, as I mentioned earlier, so many of our patrons feel very strongly about where they're seated in the theater, about the types of artists that they see. So I think for them, for a lot of them, it really is such a different experience that I think some of the feedback is we think it's great, it's phenomenal what you're doing, but we're going to wait to come back, you know, until we're in person to see shows live. But then again, we have reached kind of a different audience, particularly from a single ticket purchase perspective. So, you know, every performing arts center wants more subscribers than they do single ticket buyers, right? But it's always a mixed bag because that's just the nature of things today. And I think that what we found with online programming is that people buy much later than they normally would buy for a live performance. They can buy kind of at the last minute. They're really free to try things they wouldn't normally try because the barrier to entry is much lower. They don't have to feel self-conscious about, you know, not knowing who a particular artist is or what that performance might be like. But then equally, because we're at a university, we've been able to also reach out to a larger alumni base and try to kind of eventize, if you will, these performances with alumni clubs in different cities. And so I think that's been a great benefit for us in terms of when we consider alumni engagement and fundraising, which of course is another big part of any arts and culture institution. So in a way, it's really kind of opened up another audience for us, while at the same time really having us trying to navigate how our core audience, you know, engages with this series.
So Christopher, it's fascinating for me to hear how you've done this adaptation and thinking about your audience. You have the advantage of knowing who each of your customers are. You know, it's not like you just see things that have moved off the shelf. You know, somebody had to go on and register, and you have, you know, what their history has been as well. So I'm curious how you've been using the data and taking advantage of the data that you have. And I thought about this with respect to you talking about alumni. So there might be some alumni that were while they were at Penn, were attending. They now have moved to someplace else, and it makes it difficult for them to attend. And are you taking advantage of that and being able to try and look at past behavior and use it? And just talk to us for a little bit about how you're using the individual data.
Sure. So the short answer, Dave, is that we're just starting to really look at that data and to look at customer metrics. And I think that it's probably not an overstatement to say that really your typical nonprofit will never have enough staff to really analyze data in the way that a commercial entity will be able to. So you rely a lot of times on consultants to do that. You rely a lot on Google tracking and Google Analytics to give you kind of a dashboard of analytics that you can report out on. And that certainly I've set up in previous roles. You know, as at Carnegie, we built a lot of the infrastructure, but a lot of the institutions really are just at the beginning stages of that. I think in our case, a lot of what we were looking at initially was to see, well, you know, we adapted these programs to an hour in length, for instance. Here's the frequency. How are people consuming this content? And I think we were pleased to see that really the time on site, for example, for one metric for how long people are engaging with content on a website was pretty consistent, and it was really right around that 55-minute mark. You know, most people got through the entire performance portion of the program, which was around 40 minutes or so, and then through most of the Q&A. So that was really positive, and I think it showed us that that kind of truncated performance type for digital was really the right approach. I do think that we've been able to provide some pretty rigorous subscription analysis in terms of, or subscriber analysis rather, to see which households were engaging with this digital series. If we had some of our most loyal households who would typically subscribe to a full season, what were they buying? How many packages were they buying? And I think in many cases, we were surprised that some people who weren't really loyal subscribers, who had maybe bought single tickets in the past, were now buying kind of small digital subscriptions. And then in other ways, our most loyal subscribers, many of whom were not taking advantage of these digital series. They might be buying one single ticket, for example, to see if they liked it. So I think we're at the beginning stages of a deeper analysis of some of those metrics. I can tell you that we've been tracking a lot of the content we've been creating for our blog. Prior to the pandemic, we didn't have a blog. That was something we were thinking about for the future. And so the necessity to create and churn out a really consistent range of content has been something that we've really invested in, and that we've been able to really follow those metrics and to see that so many people are reading those articles, are engaging with that content as well. But I think we have a lot more analysis to do, to be honest with you, in the months ahead. One thing that we are in the process of right now, though, is really looking back at the last 5 or 6 months to see really when we launched this season last summer and then through December, the first half of the season, what the real kind of consumption metrics were about, a more thorough analysis.
Wonderful. So Chris, as we are kind of coming to an end, I would love to hear your thoughts on going forward. So, I mean, there's an interesting disruption in the marketplace that happened, I guess, 8 months ago or so. On the one hand, of course, audience, their viewing habits got disrupted. On the other hand, artists as well, their performances got disrupted in that, from what I understand, and you can tell us a little bit more, a lot more artists who were originally, trying to do the concerts are perhaps trying to go direct to consumers, through their own micropayments, through their own channels and so on. Where do you see Annenberg Center, for example? One of the things we've seen, Dave and I, in many interviews we've done, is this issue of brand and how trustworthy the brand is and how important it's become actually over time for people to like that brand. And do you see a similar kind of pattern in your audience as well, which is they have so many other options, but they believe in Annenberg Center's capabilities to curate the right experience for them?
Right.
Would love to hear
That's a great question, Raghu. I think that it's exactly that. It's exactly, our value add, if you will, is that we really curate. We really are very thoughtful about the types of programs we bring to Philadelphia. And I think in every season, we're really going for a curatorial balance. We're trying to introduce audiences to new artists and to challenge them a little bit, while also giving them programs and bringing in artists that we know that they love and that they're very passionate about. So every season, it's a balance that's based on, very kind of unexciting factors like who's available, who's touring, what type of program is there. I think now with digital delivery in the short term and medium term, artists have been able to go directly to audiences. But I think what they found very quickly, and what we found very quickly, was that there was still a heavy reliance on the presenter or the center who had the built-in audience. And I think that is, even though our audience is primarily a live audience, we still have the customer database, we still have the email database, we still have the web traffic. And so I think artists were very quick to realize that in addition to their own audiences that they've built on social media, for example, they needed to partner with the presenters as they would in the real world to leverage those eyeballs and that attention. So I think that hasn't necessarily changed as much, although I do think that consumers have gotten very savvy about following particular ensembles or artists that they love. They can see them in a different way than they used to be able to before. And that's before the pandemic. I think people could, follow these artists on social media to a large extent. I think moving forward, the biggest change probably, in my opinion, is going to be that digital delivery will be integrated with live performance in a different way. So I don't think we'll be capturing every performance. I think that would be, we're not able to scale to that extent. But I do think that we will look at a curated selection of programs that are captured digitally, particularly in the short term for audiences that don't feel comfortable coming back right away, but also as a kind of a added benefit for people who are really subscribing or donating. So that if we build a kind of catalog of unique performances for audiences, it's just an added incentive to subscribe or donate to the center. So you may buy a 3 performance package and subscribe for that series. But as a result of doing that and not buying a single ticket, you're going to get access to a digital catalog that you wouldn't otherwise have. So I think there is a value add associated with a lot of this captured content. And I think moving forward, you'll see kind of parallel seasons in the sense that you'll have the live season that will be the primary focus with complementary digital delivery, kind of worked in. The challenge from a production standpoint is you really need double the crew to kind of capture those performances. There's the live performance production as well as the digital capture. But I think that's totally attainable for a lot of these places.
So Christopher, as you've learned, you can only go a certain length with your programs. We too have learned that. And so I'm going to give you one last question. And I'm going to give you 60 seconds to try and answer the question, which is, what advice do you have to other operations that are in performing arts? What would be your big takeaway and advice that you would want to give and provide them?
I think the first thing would be to really radically rethink how you deliver programs and engage with your audience, while also remembering that your core constituency of subscribers and donors is your most important constituency. In addition to the artists that you present, that's really your most important constituency. And so you've got to figure out a way, certainly at this time, to keep them very engaged and very excited about what you're doing, even if you can't see them in person. So that would be my advice.
Great advice, Christopher. You've had to navigate, this whole path forward with no dress rehearsal, and you've done a wonderful job. Thank you very much for joining us, and good luck going forward. So thank you
so much. Thanks to both of you for having me. I appreciate it.